Welcome to the newest instalment of our webinar series, and thanks for coming along. I'm Hayley. I'm going to be hosting tonight, and we're going to be hearing a lot from Dr. Rebecca Spindler today as she answers some of our questions. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're virtually meeting this evening. So I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend those respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples that might be present tonight. Just a little bit about myself first. My name's Hayley, as I said, and I'm a recent graduate of La Trobe University, where I studied a Bachelor of Science, Wildlife and Conservation Biology. I'm lucky enough that I sort of knew that was the course for me quite early on. So in year 10, I attended a talk by Associate Professor Peter Green, who you can see on the screen, and he convinced me that it was the right degree to do, and I remained convinced for the rest of high school up until I applied. And I'm really glad that I did. So Pete was my inspiration to go to uni. And then while I was at uni, I was totally inspired by the people that I met and the opportunities that were sort of given to me through the Botany and Plant Ecology Society and the research group. I met some excellent people there and they sort of really helped me carve my way through and know what I wanted my path to be in conservation. So over the past 6 months, since I graduated La Trobe, I've been the Victorian Endangered Flora intern with Bush Heritage, which means that I've worked really closely with the Victorian ecologist Julie Radford, which when we're on the subject of excellent scientists like Beck, Julie Radford is another one of those. We are developing a plan to reinforce and reintroduce several declining flora species in the Karakara to Wedderburn landscape, which you can see in yellow there in Victoria. The Karakara to Wedderburn landscape, or the KKW landscape, has been identified by Bush Heritage, so you probably won't hear it mentioned anywhere other than BHA. And it's critically important to Victoria's biodiversity. So it has heaps of really high quality remnant vegetation, particularly grassy woodlands and heathy woodlands, which are both endangered ecosystems. Despite the importance to Victoria's biodiversity, it's quite underrepresented in our national and state parks protections, which is why Bush Heritage has sort of taken it under its wing. So what is a day in the life of a bushy intern like? To be completely honest, thanks to COVID, it was often sitting in front of a computer working on my plan, which is fine. But when I did get out into the field, I was lucky enough to work on basically putting together a herbarium for all of Bush Heritage's Victoria reserves. So that meant walking across these reserves during the day, looking at all the plants, totally nerding out, and it was a really good year for flowering too, so it was great. Then my evenings involved processing all of those plants I collected, identifying what I could and pressing them, and hopefully soon mounting all of these awesome plants. A question that I really often get asked is, how did I get into the internship program with Bush Heritage? And my answer for that is the same as my answer for basically any job that I did throughout my degree or afterwards, and it's volunteering. So volunteering just opened up so many doors for me, and I'm sure Beck will talk a little bit more about it as well later on. But I think the best thing that you can do if you're a young conservation scientist, not only for your career, but also for your personal development, is pick a project or 2 or 3 that you're really interested in and passionate about and volunteer your time on them, because you won't regret it. So that's enough about me. Let's get on to the good part of tonight, which is Beck. So Beck's going to talk a lot more later about her current role at Bush Heritage. But for now, I just want you to know that Beck is Bush Heritage Australia's Science and Conservation Executive Manager, which essentially means that Beck oversees the conservation science program that's at the heart of everything Bush Heritage does. There's no decision that's made or action that's taken by Bush Heritage that doesn't fit with this plan, which is why I think pretty objectively, she has the best job in the world. But I don't think we can start there, Beck, to really look at your journey through conservation. I think we have to start at the start. So what made you want to be a scientist?
Thanks, Hayley. Before I answer that, I just want to say thanks so much to the Bush Heritage crew for getting us. Thank you all for coming and nerve-wrackingly listening to me talk about myself for 20 minutes. And thank you, Hayley, for jumping in and being the host for tonight. You're a naturally curious and wonderful interviewer, so I'm looking forward to it. But I know it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, so I thank you very much for doing it. And I'd also like to recognise verbally that I stand on what is, was, always will be Gadigal country, and recognise and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that this is land that was never ceded. So science, interesting. So I was really lucky to go to a fantastic school in Camberwell Girls Grammar School that was incredibly strong in STEM. And it was just something that I was always quite good at and I picked up pretty quickly and I just really, really enjoyed. So science, I think, it wasn't necessarily a choice between science and not science. For me, it was really the discipline. Which discipline in science did I want to take up? And I have to say my teachers, geography was amazing, maths and physics. The maths and physics teacher was Mr. O'Brien, was just absolutely fantastic. And he made physics practical and he made it so easy to understand. And so from the very first thing, really, I went all the way through high school and I entered university and I was convinced I was going to be a physics student and I was going to work on something which was emerging then, but is something that's quite common now and I actually do in my spare time, which is working on renewable energy and really driving new technology for getting away from fossil fuels. And I attended my first few lectures of physics and was shocked. I didn't like it. I didn't understand it. I felt like I was on a different planet. It was just utterly different. And I don't know whether that was a hazing or if it was actually just that much harder, but I felt like I had come with a really good grounding in physics and was not able to persist with it. So I floated around, I think, in my undergrad degree for a little while, kept up with maths, obviously, and chemistry and biology. And it became more and more clear that biology was the thing that I really liked. I liked the complexity of it. I liked that there wasn't always one right answer and that it was you would have a discussion and you would come to conclusions with groups of people at a different time. And then I really liked botany, but I have a terrible memory. So I could never quite remember the systematics and the plant names and the speciation and all that sort of thing. And it seemed a bit more that zoology was much more about those relationships and the complex ecosystems. And I'll just share my screen for a minute so you can see what I'm talking about now, because I was lucky enough that as I was finishing my undergrad, a fantastic woman came over from Monash University, Professor Marilyn Renfree, who was studying marsupial reproduction. And I was very keen to get into some native species work. And this just seemed particularly fascinating. This is a Tamar wallaby, obviously with a pouch young, a fairly advanced pouch young over on the left. And they're just such an incredible marsupial, but they, like more than 100 species, nearly 130 species, excuse me, have a biological capability called embryonic diapause, where the female will release an egg, they'll mate with a male, fertilise the egg and let it grow to what's called a blastocyst, and that's what's on the right-hand side of the screen there. In marsupials, that's a single-layered, single-cell layer right next to the mucoid coat and then a shell around the outside. All those coatings prevent the embryo from invading the uterus, but at the same time, the maternal system is sending signals to the embryo to just hold fire, don't grow, but don't die either, because the nutritional signals, the environmental conditions aren't right for that embryo to grow and turn into a pouch young just yet. The Tamar wallabies do that for a number of months, but red kangaroos can do it for a number of years if the nutritional environmental conditions aren't right. Seals do it. We think giant pandas do it. There's a number of different mammals that go through this. So I was lucky enough to do my honours with Marilyn and with David Gardner, who was at the Monash Medical Centre at the time and is now at Melbourne. And that went really well and it turned into a PhD. And we didn't answer all the questions, but we were looking to understand what those control mechanisms were around what switches on and off reproduction. which got me thinking a little bit about where I wanted to go in my future. And just in the last year or so of my PhD, encouraged by my supervisors, started thinking about what I wanted to work on and who I wanted to work with moving forward. So I wrote probably 24 letters after doing a bit of research and looking at the kinds of science that I thought I'd like to be involved in next. I wrote to about 24 people to say, I'd really like to work with you. I'm just finishing my PhD. I'm available for a postdoc. I thought we might be able to study this together and sort of propose a bit of a research plan or a project that we might be able to do. And I was super lucky in that I did get a response from Dr. David Wilt, who at the time was head of science at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, although it was called Conservation Research Centre back then, which is nestled in the Shenandoah Mountains in Virginia, about 90 kilometres west of Washington, DC. So beautiful setting, but incredible labs, amazing labs in this particular area that was absolutely dedicated to research. And they were researching endangered species, so cheetahs, clouded leopards, everything, but they had a colony of domestic cats that they used as a model, and they knew an incredible amount about domestic cats. And so what I had intended to do was go over there and study and develop contraceptives that we could broadcast out into the Australian landscape that would only contracept domestic cats and would not have any impact on any of our native species. It was pretty clear soon after I joined them that with the feasibility, looking through the feasibility and producing a feasibility study, the differences between cat and marsupial and native species reproduction simply wasn't significant enough with the technology that we had back then to broadcast something that wouldn't be taken up and have a significant impact. But I was lucky enough to stick around. David and the crew, an incredibly expert crew, as I say, on field of reproduction, both endocrinology and gamete biology, everything, encouraged me to stick around, and we were able to develop a new system that helped particularly cheetah and clouded leopard reproduction, but really it would work for any endangered species. And so I was able to finish off my 18-month postdoc working in the labs up there, and again, learning an incredible amount. Just being at the Smithsonian was amazing to see the people that came by. It was an incredible stopping off shop for people who were coming through America. They would always stop off at the Smithsonian and have a chat and give a talk. And so it was an amazing learning experience all the way through to the end of my postdoc.
Wow, it's an amazing opportunity. Something that interests me, and I'll just really quickly, because time is already progressing quite a bit. You moved from wallabies in Australia to cats in America, which to me is such a daunting change. So just really quickly, was that difficult? Was there anything in particular that was quite difficult about that? Or?
There wasn't anything particularly difficult. Like you do have to familiarise yourself with the new system, but there are slight, possibly in some species, different triggers for different actions. But when you're talking about sexual reproduction, there's lots of species that reproduce asexually as well that don't require the gametes to get involved. But when you're talking about sexual reproduction, the egg needs to be released, the sperm needs to be released, they need to get together, and they need somewhere safe to grow up. So there are different hormones that trigger that sort of cascade of events in marsupials than eutherians or placental animals. But just to give you an idea, the last time I was actually properly a biologist was looking at coral reproductive biology. So all of the principles have carried all the way through, not just from marsupials to eutherians, but then on to invertebrates as well.
Wow. So you were quite clearly enjoying your work at the Smithsonian. You planned to be there for about 18 months and then stuck around for about 7 years, which give or take is a little bit of a difference. So, how does that happen? What was the choice there?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that happens to me quite often in my career. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I was exceptionally lucky as I was doing some of the work that I was talking about with the gamete manipulation and improving reproduction in some of these cat species. when a contingent came through from China, from the China Wildlife Authority, and they were working with the IUCN Conservation Breeding Specialist Group and Susie Ellis, trying to figure out how to improve giant panda breeding. And that was specifically around a number of pandas. There was a significant bamboo die-off a few years earlier because of a synchronization of bamboo flowering. And a lot of these pandas were driven into towns to forage around tips and garbage areas, and could potentially have presented a danger to the local communities. So they created these beautiful, so this is the Wolong Nature Reserve up the top of the Qingling Mountains, which is a very inaccessible area of China. But they built a fantastic sort of holding and breeding facility for the giant pandas, but the breeding part wasn't working. So a Chinese contingency came over to try and organise an international multidisciplinary group of veterinarians, reproductive biologists, behaviourists, nutritionists, everybody, to try and figure out the root cause of these giant pandas not breeding in captivity. This is Huan Yan. Over on the left there, he was my absolute Chinese colleague. We worked hand in hand, and that was true of every pairing. You know, the vets worked from America and England, actually worked with Chinese vets. The behaviourists worked internationally across borders as well, and it was a fantastic learning opportunity on both sides. And I really started to see the value of working together in a multidisciplinary team and pulling all of that information together. So we were able to together produce a number of different, certainly publications, but a couple of really great books. And with Susie's guidance, we were pulling together recommendations that would change the management, improve the management of the giant pandas, and improve their reproductive success and rearing capability for a lot of these giant pandas. And I was asked to stay on. So beyond the biomedical survey, I stayed on and helped implement a lot of those recommendations with my Chinese colleagues. And I know a lot of people in Victoria have been in isolation for a little while, but it's brought back a lot of memories about living up the top of the Qingling Mountains. And Qingling means closed gate. They're very inaccessible. It takes 3.5 hours drive up a very windy mountain road to get there. And so most of the time it was me with 12 Chinese colleagues, the keepers, the vets, the managers of this facility, and 57 giant pandas. So, and don't forget, this is in the days before Zoom and Skype, and email was barely a thing. So it brought back lots of memories of isolation. Of course, there were some significant perks. And when you first turn up to China in February, it is cold, but you have these amazing 6-month-old pandas. By the time you come back, they've grown up, and that's just about the last time you actually want to go in with them, because they are bears and they bite, and they can get a little boisterous. They do love they love to wrestle, they love a tickle, but getting out of the exhibit when you're trying to leave and unlatching yourself from the giant panda can actually be the hardest job you've got. And then again, my next story is again just sort of being in the right place at the right time, but also being ready to say yes to an opportunity. So as people were figuring out what we were doing with the giant pandas, I met Ronaldo Morato, who's the person on the left there, and he was running with his wife Rosi Morato an incredible NGO called Pro Carnívoros that was really focused very much on the carnivores of Brazil. And they collaborated with many different groups around South America. And so Ronaldo invited me to come and work with their team on looking at the reproductive capacity of jaguars and pumas, but really using that as a way of detecting the ecosystem health. We worked in zoos, undertaking full biomedical surveys, again, working with vet students and behaviourists and nutritionists and absolutely everybody to get a full biomedical workup of every jaguar that we worked on, either in a zoo or out in the wild, and jaguars and pumas. And we were able to determine the reproductive capacity and how that interplayed with the ecosystem health and with the conditions in the zoos as well. So I was incredibly lucky, and I have to say again, I learned so much, but this was a much more social project and we all worked together. And this is Junior, my absolute favourite jaguar, that we were able to stay with quite a while. We would mostly track the jaguars, dart them from a tree, catch them, do the full biomedical workup, and then put a radio collar on. And then the team were able to track these jaguars and provide recommendations to the Brazilian Environmental Agency about where to develop new protected areas. And because jaguars are such an umbrella species and they require such a large habitat, that protected all of that area for the species around the jaguar as well. It was a whole ecosystem service. And this is a project that I didn't have anything to do with really, but it was so impactful on me and showed me the great value of working in multidisciplinary, innovative teams. And it was a program that worked with local farmers to compensate them for any cattle loss due to a jaguar, but also to understand how they manage their farms, and actually gave them recommendations to keep particularly the vulnerable cows and calves away from areas where jaguars might be lurking, decreased the overall predation by jaguars, and improved that. It took away a lot of the conflict, the wildlife-human conflict, so people could coexist, farmers could coexist with jaguars. And if you can imagine that, you know, it's so hard to think about in Australia where we have nothing bigger than the dingo, and yet these guys are coexisting and running farms that are profitable, coexisting with jaguars. It's really quite phenomenal.
Incredible. To me, it sort of sounds like a zoologist's dream, all of this work that you were doing. But of course, you did end up leaving the Smithsonian. So, you know, what was the thinking behind that choice, the motivation?
Yeah, it was a tough choice, and it's interesting. I had been at the Smithsonian, as you say, for 7 years by then, and a lot of people I was working in China 6 months a year, and then going to Brazil 2 or 3 times a year for 2 or 3 weeks each, and at the same time, people were finding out what we were doing and wanted courses and lectures and things. So my last year at the Smithsonian, I think I spent 54 days at home, and that was tiring to begin with. But then I think the thing that really got me down, which is very common in science, is I had to keep raising my own salary. So I had to keep writing grants to pay for my salary, to have the certainty around my future and what I could do and who I could make commitments to. And that got really tiring. And I know many people do it for a lot longer than I did. So, you know, kudos to you. I couldn't do it. But at the same time, there was a fantastic opportunity, and I'll share again. There's a fantastic opportunity that came up at Toronto Zoo in Canada to be the head of reproduction. And I thought that would be a really fantastic opportunity. It's a great big open range zoo. They have many Canadian native species, and I thought there was going to be a really great opportunity to do lots of wonderful things. And we did find out a lot, and we provided a lot of service to the animals that were in the zoo, and undertook some interesting work around the interactions between immunology and reproduction. And that's actually continued on in some work that we've done with a PhD student from Tassie Devils in Australia, and understanding the phenomenon. And we're building an opus. So Bill Sherman, if you're looking, I'm really sorry, but I will get there. We're looking at the comparison of immunological diversity and reproductive success, and it's going to be a great paper when we do it. But, you know, I'm sure if there are any scientists watching this, many of you are familiar with the age-old paper that you've been sitting there wanting to do forever and just never quite finishing. This is it. And I was at Toronto for just about 3 years, 4 winters, and that was hard for me. I'm a cold-blooded person, so winter was difficult, but I really fundamentally missed home. It was 10 years since I'd been away since I'd left Australia, so I was really keen to come home, but I was also very keen to build back that multidisciplinary group and really work in a complex group where you're talking about all of the different factors that influence one another rather than a single discipline. And a job came up at Taronga, and I have to say I applied thinking I'm never going to get this job. It was the head of science and conservation at Taronga. I applied thinking I was never going to get the job, but at least they know I'm here and I might be able to convince them to let me know if another job comes up somewhere down the track. And had fantastic conversations over voice over phone, but also an online webinar. And this is a little while ago, but that was the first time I'd ever done that. And it was really fantastic. I was offered the job and I couldn't believe it. I was just absolutely staggered and jumped at the chance and came back as soon as I could. I had a few commitments that I had to finish off, so there was a little bit of a delay, but I came back as soon as I possibly could to an incredible team of scientists. And it was my absolute joy and privilege to bring those scientists together under a sort of unified vision of what we could do, not just for the zoo animals, but to have those animals and bring the weight of scientific evidence to improve ecosystem health, wildlife health overall, domestic animal health, but also through that improve human health, and really play in that area where those things interact with one another. Certainly they're all impacted by many of the same things that you see on the right there, but we're also very keenly aware that they interact and impact on one another. And so that group came together and we grew into a fantastic group of scientists who all took their specific discipline, the area that they were expert in, and took the time to learn everybody else's discipline enough to be able to talk intelligently with one another and build fantastic multidisciplinary programs. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. This was a fantastic project that was run by the Australian Registry of Wildlife Health, Dr. Carrie Rose and Jane Hall, when there was an outbreak of salmonella, not long after I arrived actually back in Australia, that was having significant impacts on a lot of the kids up in the northern beaches in Sydney. And by undertaking a full assessment of, by basically swabbing lots of mouths and lots of bums and lots of surfaces, the Carrie Rose and the Australian Registry of Wildlife Health were able to figure out the source of the salmonella, which was the bandicoots. But she didn't stop there, because we were interested in making sure that the solution was not to get rid of the bandicoots. She found a way to work with the councils where we changed the substrate away from sand and into, I think it was chopped up rubber tyres, recycled rubber tyres, that was less attractive to the bandicoots. So they wouldn't go into the sand pits. The problem was the bandicoots were getting into the sand pits at night and pooping and peeing and rolling around. And then the kids would come in the morning and do pretty much the same thing. And of course the diseases were transferred. So we were able to make that substrate different, so it was no longer attractive to the bandicoots. And the problem was resolved without any inhumane sort of solutions for the bandicoot themselves. And the salmonella outbreak was completely stopped. The next project was looking at an innovative pest control program. So this is actually a native rat, a bogle or a bush rat that was native to the vast majority of Sydney, really, and we think it was extirpated during the plague. I've unfortunately cut off the most easily identifying feature of the rat, which is its Mickey Mouse ears. That's how you tell it, but it does look very similar to a black rat and a brown rat. So we think they were eradicated during the plague, when every rat was considered to be a bad rat. The great thing about these guys is that they have a slightly larger and less gately sort of behind. They don't climb as well, which means they present less of a threat to our native birds, and they're fiercely territorial. So they will outcompete a black rat and a brown rat every time. So we were able to re-establish populations on North Head and Bradley's Head in a collaborative project with UNSW, and found that they were actually really fiercely competitive and decreased overall rat populations, which was great for the local residents and great for our native birds as well. And just the last project I want to tell you about from Taronga, and there are many I could tell you about. They're really fantastic scientists and still doing such a wonderful job. This is being run by Neil Jordan, Dr. Neil Jordan, who, again, working from Taronga, had been working in Botswana for a long time up until this point, and was very interested in the human-wildlife conflict issues there. He worked on the principle and working with communities who would often wear masks on the back of their head so that they looked like they were looking in both directions at once. And that was to deter ambush predators like lions. If lions feel like they're looking at you, the idea was that they wouldn't attack. He picked up this idea from the local communities, as I say, and then painted very realistic looking eyes on the backs of cows, or half a herd of cows, and just waited until they were exposed to the lions, the ambush predators. And it did work. we found that the vast majority of cattle that were taken actually had no eyes painted on them, and the majority of the cows that did have eyes painted on them were well and truly protected. So it just, it was such a fantastic thing to see all these disciplines working together in an innovative way and thinking of great ideas and supporting one another in a fantastic way that really had great outcomes for humans, for wildlife, and for ecosystems.
I like the intersection of art and science there. It's pretty impressive.
Aren't they beautiful eye spots? They're just incredible.
Just a reminder to everyone in the audience, the Q&A box is there, so if you want to pop a question in for Beck, feel free. We're sort of getting closer to the end now, so Beck, I might just jump right in with bush heritage. So many of the opportunities that you've had seem to be sort of that based on conversations with people that you've had in those opportunities. So was it a similar thing at Bush Heritage? And in the end, what is it that you do with this best job in the world?
It is the best job in the world. Yeah, okay, good one. Thanks, Hayley. And I'm sorry, I'm probably talking a little bit too much, but so I, again, was super lucky. I had reached about where I wanted to go with Taronga and realised that they really needed someone new to take them to the next level. And I was going to have a gap year. I was going to take a gap year and travel with my husband around Australia, very aware of bush heritage reserves and where they were and where we were going to visit. And saw the job and thought, no, I'm on a track. My husband's a bit like a ship. You've got to start steering 6 months ahead before you want to actually change direction. So I couldn't undo all of that. But a friend of mine rang, and thanks, Kate, again, if you're watching, and said, no, you really need to at least have a conversation with Jared O'Neill, who's the CEO at the time. And I did. I called him up on his mobile, complete cold call, and he was incredibly generous and lovely. And he gave me 3/4 of an hour to talk about my history and bush heritage and how it might all fit. And, I felt like a lot of my conversation was, but I shouldn't apply because I'm not good enough. I don't know enough and I've got so much to learn and I've done this. But I, at the same time, I could see so much potential for us to work together in lots of ways forward. So he encouraged me to apply and I got the job. Just absolutely incredible. But let me stop talking about me for a second so that I can tell you more about bush heritage. I just want to take you back through what bush heritage does and who we are. And this map is the map that absolutely blows me away every single time. So each of these dots represent either a partnership where we work with somebody on their land or where we own our own reserves. So the blue dots are where we own our own reserves, and other way around, red dots are where we own our own reserves, and the blue dots are partnerships. In large part, working with Aboriginal people on their land, and the blue dots do not do that extent of land justice at all. There's really, those Indigenous protected areas are often millions of hectares of land, huge responsibility, and they just do an incredible job. It's a great privilege for us and for me in particular to work with Aboriginal people and help them achieve their conservation and cultural goals on their land. And I know we all feel very, very lucky. The spread of the dots give you an idea of the coverage across Australia. We really are present across all of the states and territory. But the fascinating thing and the important thing is that add all of this up together and we have influence over 11.3 million hectares of every single habitat type and a number of different threatened species, and of course working with people of enormous diversity and really great knowledge. And again, one of my greatest privileges to work with those people. I think the thing that has captured me about bush heritage is yes, where we work, and we certainly protect where we are needed most, underprotected areas that are fragile environments that are disappearing and make up what is Australia in terms of nature and the support system, the health support system that we all rely on. But it's how we work. We work very much in partnership. And again, that is largely with Aboriginal people on their land. But whoever we enter into a partnership with, it is a genuine partnership. We give generously and we acknowledge everyone for what they give us, and we find a shared future and then work absolutely to the bone to make sure that those shared goals come true. We also work in collaboration. Science is at the foundation of everything that we do. Every conservation property has a plan that identifies the knowledge gaps that we need to fill before we can move forward. And we do that in collaboration with many universities. We have over 50 projects going at the moment, working with universities around Australia, internationally, CSIRO, the Smithsonian, you name it. We've got lots of research projects. And again, that collaboration is founded on a genuine shared interest as well as expertise. But we also look very much forward into what our lands are going to look like in 20, 30, 50 years' time. We're not just working with the threats that we see now. We're really taking on extensive information, again, with the generosity of CSIROs providing us a great deal of climate change information. We're mapping out what that means for our reserves, working with our reserve teams and our traditional owners where we can to design a future, which means that that biodiversity is still going to be there. It may look different, it may be different, but it's still thriving, it's still viable, it's still functional. And that brings us to the final one, which is solution-oriented. Even before I joined Bush Heritage, I would often go onto the website and the Facebook page and certainly read the newsletters with relish about the success stories that were coming through every single quarter. The people that are out there, people that I now know, the reserve managers, the healthy landscape managers, the ecologists, working to their fingers to the bone to design new solutions and to figure out ways of protecting our precious landscapes and our precious species. And always just, as someone said to me, the way you do it is just carve it up. The big picture looks too daunting. You can't think of it all in one. You've just got to carve it up and think about each piece by itself. And that's what we do, and that's what we present to everybody with our success stories. And at the heart of all of this, and at the heart of all my entire career, I think, is just the people. I've been exceptionally lucky to work with incredible, dedicated, knowledgeable, wonderful, crazy people who, I have never been disappointed by a Bush Heritage person. Every time something becomes possible, if something becomes an idea, it's possible. It's just an absolute joy to work with every single person in Bush Heritage, and boy, together we're a force to be reckoned with. So it's, again, my super great privilege, and 100%, Hayley, you hit it on the head. This is the best job in the world.
What an amazing note to end on. Thank you so much, Beck. Why don't we just jump straight into questions then from the audience? If we don't get to every question, don't worry too much, because we will try and answer them in the coming week and send you a little response. So don't worry. We've got a question here from Elizabeth. Amazing stories, Beck. You mentioned volunteering, but are there other networking opportunities that are also advantageous other than volunteering, or any avenues to meet and collaborate? Any other avenues to meet and collaborate with like-minded people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Elizabeth. And I think particularly now, COVID has brought some terrible things, but everything's online. There are so many resources that you can look at now. And I agree with Hayley 100%. If you can volunteer, if you can try what you think you might be interested in, just to give it a go and test out your capacity to be in the field, your interest in being in the lab, your whatever it is, give it a go. I had to work most holidays, so I didn't have as much volunteering opportunities as a lot of people do. And that's okay. You find your opportunities. Talk with as many people as you possibly can. If you find someone that's doing a project that you think would be really interesting, just ask them a million questions. Talk to them in person if you can. Watch webinars. And now is the time, as I say, to see as many webinars as you possibly can. But it's the scientific community. I think maybe it's changed. It used to be scary. I don't think it's scary anymore. I don't know whether I grew up or it grew up. I don't know what happened. But don't be afraid to just write to someone who's doing really great research. They may not get back to you straight away because everyone's really busy, but please just give it a go and write. I wrote to 24 people and got 3 responses when I finished my PhD. So, you've just got to keep trying.
There was also the ESA conference recently. It was totally online. So you were connected with all of these people all over the world from scientific communities and the ecology in particular. So
And I have to say, it was brilliant. You could actually see so many more talks because you were online, whereas when they're live, you could only go to 1 out of 6 or 7 or 8 concurrent streams. So you're missing, you know, that part of the conference. With everything being online, you could watch absolutely everything if you were staying up until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Not recommended. So there's a question here from Nathan. How can we influence government given that science is often ignored in favour of political decision making?
Really good question. And Bush Heritage is doing what we can. There's huge value. And I think, you know, talking about the benefits of multidisciplinary groups coming together in science, there's even greater benefit in different groups across society coming together in defence of science or traditional owners or culture or water or whatever it is. Because when you have somebody speaking from the usual suspects, so if you have scientists speaking in favour of science, everybody's going to go, well, of course. And I think if you have a lot of people who are coming from all different walks of life banding together and say, no, we understand that science is actually required for us to understand where we are in the universe and how to make things better. I think there's a real key to that. But I think also persistence. And certainly the Bush Heritage way is to work with government and find a better way forward. I think one of the great things, again, about Bushies is that you can rage against the dark, but you know what? It's better to light a candle.
Got a question from David. You've learned a lot about big cat fertility. Is there now more possibility of depressing fertility rates amongst feral cats without impacting native species?
So the basic biology is still the same, and the sorts of techniques that we were talking about would still have lots of different crossover impacts on different species. But I was just at an exciting sort of workshop this week, and there are lots of people working on gene driving. And gene driving is a whole new technology that must be completely studied, and we must absolutely understand the risks before we do it. But what we're trying to do at the moment is investigate the potential to turn offspring into only one gender. And imagine cats, for example, or rabbits, only giving birth to male offspring. It would take a number of generations, but eventually, with all of the rabbits only giving birth to males, they're not going to be able to find a female to breed, and they will eventually die out. And this is a technology that, again, needs to be tested, needs to be thoroughly researched, and we need to understand any of the adverse impacts, but is one of the first opportunities I've seen to really think about a national scale that will be self-managing and hopefully work very, very well and humanely, be totally humane. It won't have any impact on live animals. They'll just be, you know, one gender born. So the new animals, the next generation won't be born at all.
And finally, I think, because we're running short of time, one thing that's really important to science is sort of finding those knowledge gaps and then trying to fill them. So where would you say, for any young conservation scientist right now, where are the greatest needs for scientists in conservation, and, you know, where should people be trying to fit in those gaps?
Yeah, there's lots. You know, everything from large-scale global climate change, which is actually probably more of a social science issue. We need to convince governments, we need to convince people to change behaviour and see an alternative way forward that isn't dependent on fossil fuels, right down to then the mitigation and working with a diversity of knowledge and blending knowledge systems together to find innovation to move forward in terms of everything from land management to pest control to absolutely everything. But I don't want to guide anybody in a particular area because that's the greatest need or because that's where the jobs are. I think my mum gave me the best advice I've ever had when I was little and agonising about how few jobs there are in zoology. And she just said, don't worry about it. Don't look at it from a commercial point of view. Do what you love. Because if you love it, you'll be good at it. If you're good at it, you'll get a job. And if you're determined to have an impact in a particular area, for me, that was conservation from fairly early on. It was very clear that you just apply that to conservation. And I don't think that's true of science. You can be an accountant, you could be a banker, you can be a restaurateur and have an impact on conservation if that's what you really want to do. But just do what you love, be very, very good at it, and you will always succeed.
Thank you so much, Beck. That was amazing. You're just an absolute inspiration to myself, and I'm sure I'm not only speaking for myself, but for all young ecologists, botanists, zoologists, anyone out there. It was a really invaluable presentation, so thank you so much.
Thank you,
and
Hayley.
yeah, thank you to everyone who joined us for taking the time to have a listen. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And we'll see you at the next webinar, hopefully.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Hayley. Fantastic job.